Community is everything. We're proud to support ours. Through partnerships with fellow community leaders and organizations, we're helping our neighbors access essential resources and services so we can all thrive. Learn more at BofA.com/community.
Good morning, Detroit. Good morning, Detroit. Specifically, a special good morning to the east side of Detroit. Anybody? I thought I'd wake you up just a little bit because y'all were a little quiet. Good morning. We're so excited to be here. Special thanks to all of the panelists on the stage for joining me. And we are going to get right into it because education, of course, is a hot button topic. But in fact, Dr. Vitti, I wouldn't be the journalist I am if I didn't start with you first, because there's some news today around food and food vendor service for DPS CD. And folks are all up in arms about the food. Our kids aren't being fed. What's happening? Can you kind of set the record straight? All the media is here. Set the record straight. What's really happening? Of course, DPS is required to teach, but you know, you guys have to do everything, including feed the kids. So talk a little bit about what's going on.
Sure. Quickly, all students in all schools at all grade levels will continue to be fed breakfast and lunch. We rely on U.S. Foods as our food distributor. They have had some issues with supply chains due to strikes, specifically truck driver strikes across the nation. The most local effective strike was in Wixom. That was resolved yesterday. So there's still some lingering supply chain issues, but we're going to continue to feed all children breakfast and lunch. Just the menu will be lighter, but we'll still feed everyone, and the supply chain issue should rectify in a week or two.
Thank you, Dr. Vitti. Our children are being fed, ladies and gentlemen, so no need to worry there. Let's get right into it. So I want to start. Growing Michigan Together Councilmember Anika Goss, I don't know if Anika is here, was quoted in BridgeDetroit. Hint, hint, if you're not subscribed to BridgeDetroit, what are you doing with your life? Recently saying that an economic growth strategy has to start with education, especially in Detroit. And she went on to say that without intentional inclusivity of Black and brown people, that the policies in their very nature will be exclusive. So the policies that result from this council report will have far and wide implications for the state of Michigan, but more specifically, the city of Detroit. So Angelique, Dr. Vitti, how should Detroit be showing up in this conversation around implementation?
I'll go first. I'll say that Detroit has the largest school district, and so we have to do right by Detroit, and when we do, we'll do right by the state. There's also a lot of innovation that's happening inside of DPS-CD, so a lot of it is about funding what's working and fueling some of that work already. In terms of the work group that I was a part of that Chandra led, there were 18 of us, there were representatives, a good chunk of us were there from Detroit. We had community organizers, we had policy people, we had SUPs, we had teachers, we had the teachers union, and youth voice, which is extremely important. Mm-hmm. We had a brilliant young person from 482 Forward, who is the communications director, and being able to be in those rooms while we're talking conceptually about growing population and talk about what that means to grow up in DPS, now DPS-CD, what it means to go to Renaissance or to Cass Tech, and also what more investment can lead to. It's critical. Yeah. And that shaped our recommendations.
Yeah. Dr. Vitti, you want to add to that?
I would just add that when you look at the recommendations that came from the council, I think it benefits all children in Michigan, and then therefore it would benefit Detroit children specifically, Black children in the city. But with that said, the key part of the recommendations is the commitment to equitable funding. And so when you think about like broadly the recommendations, when you think about a better accountability system, coherency in the governance structure, thinking differently about recruiting teachers, connecting pre-K-12 to post-secondary. Again, that'll benefit all Michigan children, but specifically, we still have a problem in Michigan around equitable funding. Yeah. When you look at even the governor and the legislature has done a great job of increasing per pupil funding. We're at $9,600. That's still an adequate statewide, but then when we look at that specific to Detroit, $9,600 is still less than Bloomfield Hills or Birmingham, which is at $13,000 per student. And so when you look at the racial history of this country, the inequities that are linked, the current inequities that exist, we can't think that we're going to address the historic and current challenges linked to race by doing everything the same. And that means how we fund schools and how we educate children. But we have to be honest about funding, because the average child, every individual child needs a different amount of investment.
Yeah.
And that's not happening in Michigan. So I think if we implement the recommendations of the council and move to equitable funding, where you move to equality and then giving more to children that need more, we're going to see better results and specifically help Black children in Detroit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead. You guys can clap. I hear some clapping. We're gonna talk a little bit more about funding a little later on. I would also say that we cannot overstate that a thriving economy is inextricably tied to a thriving educational system, and we can't invest in one without the other, right? So Jeff, I'm coming to you because I want you to tell me, I want you to help us draw some of those connections, right? We're aiming to grow population. We know that education is a key factor that people consider when they want to or are thinking about moving to a city. Can you sort of draw some of those connections for us?
Yeah, of course. So, our organization benchmarks against other states. How is Michigan doing versus other states? And what we see, the most successful states have a strong educational foundation, right? It's this virtuous cycle of having a really strong education foundation, having high incomes, being able to create those high-paying jobs, that high concentration in communities that are growing the fastest of really highly educated individuals means that there's a high concentration and a very big growth driver for those knowledge economy jobs. The jobs that are really representing now the future of not just our economy, but where income and wealth is going to be created. We need to do better at that. And part of what I think the council took on, part of what Launch Michigan, which I chair, tries to take on is saying, where is Michigan today from an educational perspective versus other states, versus those we compete with for job creation? And if you look at it and you ask, let's go back and say, if you ask Michiganders where they think the education system ranks, they put us about average, 25, 26 when you ask voters. But when we look at Kids Count, for instance, that measures the educational performance of states, we're 42nd. When you look at individual school districts, 7 out of 8 of them underperform their peers in other states. This is an issue that's not just about Detroit. It's not just about Pontiac or Benton Harbor, and that's a lot of times what you see, not in Bridge, of course, but in a lot of the media, that it focuses on the gaps that are happening within areas like Detroit. It is a Michigan problem. We have to address this systemically. And it starts with setting a goal for what we want a high school diploma to represent. It's got to be a set of competencies. It's not just an attendance record. It's not just that you got a D- or a C- and you were able to pass a certain amount of standardized tests, which don't tell you if you actually have the tools to be successful in that next step, which we want you to take, which is into some post-secondary education and into a career where you can progress here in Michigan. So you've got to have that fundamental base here in Michigan first and help the people who are here first. But I'll tell you, when I took this job 3 years ago, I went and I sat down with, I have 100 board members, the CEOs of some of the largest companies in Michigan, and I heard this story far too many times, where they were trying to recruit an executive from another state or another country with kids. They brought them in, they looked at the school system, and they said, my kids are 2 to 3 grade levels above the students in the best performing school district in the area I'm looking. That's a huge challenge for Michigan to overcome if we want to attract more people into our state.
Yeah, I love what you said about goals. And, the report is very candid around what our current conditions are. And one of the main takeaways from the report is that Michigan children are falling behind in reading level, especially Black students. The stat says that 10% of Black children are not reading at grade level by the 4th grade. How do we get here, Dr. Vitti? How does something like this happen?
Well, our system at the state level is not doing the things that high-performing states are doing. And so when you look at what's happening to all children, we are not funded at the right levels. We don't have the right accountability systems. We don't have the right teacher development pipelines. We don't have the right connection between high school programming and college and the world of work. We don't have a governance system that's coherent, between the governor, the legislature, the Michigan Department of Education. So all of that negatively will impact children at a whole. But then when you look at the reality of race in this country and the historical inequities that continue to exist today, when the system is not serving all children the way it should, it's going to disproportionately negative impact black children more than your average white child. And that's why you see the lower scores for all children, but even lower scores for black children. And that's why I think an important element of the council's recommendation is to create these new systems or better systems. And part of that, again, I'm going to go back to is equitable funding. We can't give everyone the same and address the historical issues linked to race in this country, specifically in urban cities throughout Michigan. And so if we create better systems across the board and give children who need more based on historical and current conditions, then I think we're going to see improvement in performance.
Yeah, Chandra, I want to bring you into this conversation because I think one of the first recommendations on the education portion of the report is to really change the teacher experience, right? And really look at what that job and how it needs to be reimagined. Talk about that and the challenge that the state is having toward recruiting new talent, specifically young talent, right? We're gonna say young, and we're gonna say black, and we're gonna say brown. We're gonna say it all, yeah.
So thank you very much for that question. It's great to be here and have this opportunity. When I think about education, since I was 3 years old, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I have just been passionate about education. What I didn't really realize is how fortunate I was to grow up in a bubble or even teach in a bubble and to learn about what equity is. And I'm so proud and thankful that I was able to work in Novi Community Schools for the majority of my career because I look at a place where we were talking about standards-based learning for at least 10 years. We've been talking about things that have been really sort of out of the box, utilizing technology because we had really great forward-thinking administrators, but also people that empowered teachers to feel free to go and pilot things, to take ideas out and have think tanks and experiments, and that takes resources. And so when I was a young educator, I didn't really realize how all of those things work together to give such a great learning environment. Also, when I came out of school, it was really hard to get a teaching job. I mean, there were 40, 50 people, applying for one position. People came from across the country to Michigan to find the best and brightest educators. It was a difficult place, but it was exciting to be an educator in Michigan. I would really like to get back to that space because education is such an amazing profession. Yes, we need educators of color, and we need men back in the profession. The last 10 years, we've lost a lot of men in the profession. People who said, I really want to be a teacher, but my parents are talking me out of it because I might not be able to support a family. Those conversations were being had when they weren't being had 20, 25 years ago. And we don't really think about the impact, but think about all of you out here that maybe played a high school sport. Did you have a coach that was also maybe a teacher in your high school that maybe checked up on your grades and they cared about you as a person? All of this is interconnected because we have an educator shortage, we have a coaching shortage, and we have people that are having, our students need adults to help make a difference in their life. I also think about technology. Education is evolving so much. We need to think about education as a lifelong learning process. You get out of your degree and then you know that you're gonna have to go back. There was a time where pretty much every teacher out of college knew they were gonna go get a master's degree. And that master's degree fueled counselors and social workers and teachers of library science. We don't talk about that much, but there is correlation from the Librarian Association that when reading scores started to plummet, A lot of librarians or teachers of library science who have degrees in technology were pulled out of the classroom when budget cuts came because they were seen to as being a nice to have. It's more than just sticking in the Home Depot, sticking to a library and pulling out a book. Teachers of library science are teaching teachers about how to keep up with technology and AI. I mean, shoot, I have 2 high school kids and they're, chat GPT, this and that. The ambassador raises valid points. Education is, I believe, the profession of the future because it will take us teaching our students how to build the robots, fix the robots, work with the robots, and interact with them. And I truly believe, of course I'm biased, that our profession is not going to be quickly replaced by robots. And so I think that we really need to think about education as this great opportunity. Pay is increasing across the state, more resources are coming into schools, and more people are choosing to go back into education. The numbers are starting to trickle up. So I think that we need to build on this momentum, provide the resources to our schools and to our educators, and bring back the respect to education because, in my opinion, it is the most noble profession.
Bring back the respect. I love that, yes, for our teachers. Angelique, I want to come to you, and Chandra, I want you to chime in too. In the report, there's a lot of mention of the Michigan Education Guarantee, right, which will essentially establish a whole new structure and way of doing pre-K through 12 education in the state, including, this is what got me, offering a 13th year for students who are academically ready for post-secondary education. Angelique and Chandra, take us back to the discussion in that committee and how you anticipate that this new structure, because that's what it is, an entirely new structure of doing education in Michigan, will solve the crisis we find ourselves in.
First, I want to say that we had a spicy committee. And there were 18 of us, and as I said, we came from a lot of different sectors, and I think people walked into the room with their own specific agendas of what needs to happen, and within a short period of time, we were able to lay that down. We laid down our arms, we picked up our pencils, and we started by studying the world globally, where education is more equitable, whether it's funding, where the curriculum is more relevant, where students are being taught to adapt, where teachers are given time to plan, and where students have wraparound support every step of the way. It isn't that you get to 3rd grade, you have a test, if you don't pass it, you're held back. It is actually all along the way, there's support to make sure that you are learning how to be adaptable because the world is changing so fast. And so the Michigan Guarantee came from conversations that we were having about the right to literacy. What do we have a right to know our children will learn before they graduate? And then how do we wrap them with the support, with the interventions? How do we customize curriculum so that if they are there with special needs, if they are there and speak a different language as their primary language, if they are there and they come with a lot of other things into the classroom that they need to also have wraparound support for. So the Michigan Guarantee does include, if you are not there by the time you graduate, there's an extra year, but it's actually a whole range of support that is put around a student and a teacher so that when they get to graduate, we know that they're graduating with what they need to adapt to the future.
And it starts with that high performance standard that we agreed to as a state, right, that we have to reach, because then every year backwards, you can figure out if someone on track for that or are they off, right?
I want to talk a little bit more, dig a little deeper on this too, because the Michigan Guarantee was also talking about assessments and tests and seeing where folks are. And just from my experience in school and, watching, my younger family members come up through school, these tests are proven to have a racial bias, right? How are we answering that with this guarantee?
I think I'll jump in if that's okay. I think a lot of what we talked about was what we teach has to change. That we need an upgraded and an updated school system and an updated and upgraded curriculum. And so a lot of what we need to learn is about critical thinking and adaptability. We need a culturally sensitive curriculum to be taught. We need to be taught about self-determination. And so there wasn't a discussion about leaning into standardized testing. And I think a lot of what shuts down conversations are these concepts of accountability that are about standardized tests that then lead to funding. That actually, we decided what we need is a cohesive vision for an education system. We have 850 school districts in the state of Michigan. That is close to California, which is 4 times our size. So what we actually need is to have a cohesive vision around education. We need to have a structure built around it, and then we need to empower our administrators, our superintendents and principals and teachers so that they can upgrade what we're learning and move away from testing to know whether students are ready or not.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Let's talk about money. We got a little 5 minutes left, so let's go for the gusto. The report said this verbatim: "We have an education system built for a bygone era that lacks coherence. Neither the governance structure nor the funding of Michigan's pre-K-12 and post-secondary systems are aligned to high performance." The report also leaves a lot to be desired around how we would pay for the recommendations and policy changes. So, and this is for everybody, how do we pay for this, right? And where does the opportunity index come in? Dr. Vitti, you're talking about equitable funding, and that has, the opportunity index is really a weighted formula role based upon need. What does the codification of that looks like so that we don't have to fight with every administration, right, to make sure that this is something that is sustained? Dr. Vitti, we'll start with you.
Well, I would say that the governor has made strides in thinking differently about funding, to your point, thinking about concentrated poverty, and then funding levels being higher based on concentration of poverty. We see that in what's called 31A funding, which has increased under the governor's administration and most recently with the Democrats taking control of the legislature. The challenge with that funding directly is flexibility with the funding. So that's a sort of aside, but that's also where we get in complications about federal funding, which are federal funding cannot be used for certain things, at-risk money can't be used for certain things. So on paper, it is more funding. We definitely will take that funding, but we still can't use that money the same way that state and local dollars are used for example, teacher salaries or facility upgrades or transportation or operation costs. So that's the side, but I definitely think it's moving overall in the right direction. At the end of the day, we receive what we pay for, and that's whether it's a superintendent, a principal, a teacher, a para, everyone I believe collectively is working hard. I think everyone cares. The question is, how do we address the outside reality, the challenges that happen in our society better as a system so that we can focus on literacy, math, science, social studies, career-ready, college-ready skills, and that comes with equitable funding. And so the average teacher is completely burnt out because we are asking the average teacher to address all the challenges of society and move student achievement. And we're not being realistic with what are those challenges that are being brought to the classroom. And then, scale that at a school district-wide level. And that's why equitable funding is so important. The average child in Bloomfield Hills is not dealing with the average challenges that a Detroit student is bringing into class. But yet we're not even funding it equally. So let's fund the average child equally. But then if we're really serious about opportunity, equity, school systems, public schools being the vehicle for social change and racial equality, then let's fund it equitably, which is giving those that need more so they can succeed and compete.
I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to answer this. Angelique, I want to bring you in because you're the president of the foundation, $600 million endowment, and Dr. Vitti is talking about the challenges, the external challenges that show up in the classroom that are a hindrance to student achievement. How do we pay for this?
So I think even especially because at Skillman Foundation, we've realized that we can't patch our way out of things. It is a full-scale system revamp that's needed. coming out of the pandemic, Michigan's Children did a poll and found that 80% of Michiganders are in favor of more investment in schools, even if it had to come out of their own pocket. And so I think that in this conversation, we haven't talked about money because there's such a gotcha in talking about money. Even before the commission started, there was accusations that it was all just a play to raise taxes. Do people know what taxes are? Taxes pay for public infrastructure, they pay for schools, they pay for first responders, they pay for teachers. And so no, this isn't just about raising taxes, but for 20 years, we have been underfunding our public school system, and it shows. And so each of us has to contribute, each of us has to show up at the election, at the ballot box and say, yes, our children are important. Yes, because it will populate Michigan, but yes, our children are important across the state. We each need to give more.
Yeah.
And then we will see middle class education outcomes because we have funded a middle class.
Chandra,
and let's not pretend that this is not happening in other states.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts, it's happening. So let's stop saying that this problem can't be solved.
That's true.
It's a matter of investment. It's a return on the investment.
Yeah.
Boston,
Just like you invest
Maryland.
in stocks. If you invest in a stock, you're investing in that company. We have to invest in children like we do companies.
Yeah.
It's the return on investment that we're not doing in Michigan.
Yeah.
We're
right.
creating excuses and treating other children differently because of it.
Jump in, Chandra. Jump in, hurry.
Well, I just want to say, I think a lot of people just don't understand how schools are funded just across Michigan, and they don't see things. And, you know, when you have children and you travel out and you just see athletic facilities per se, or you go out, you know, and can some communities pass bonds to get buses and build beautiful buildings, and others just can't, and millages aren't even equal. So when you really look at it, it's really complicated, and really at the end of it, it's the students that are, you know, being harmed, our communities are being harmed, our educators, our profession, and I think that's what we really need to think about, because in one district, 3D printers are in every building, and up north, you know, technology classes, you know, mousetrap cars, paper plates, and popsicle sticks, and that's really what we're dealing with when it comes to funding.
All right. 30 minutes is not enough time. Please join me in thanking Jeff, Chandra, Angelique, and Dr. Vitti. Thank y'all so much. So, I tried.
Community is everything. We're proud to support ours. Through partnerships with fellow community leaders and organizations, we're helping our neighbors access essential resources and services so we can all thrive. Learn more at bofa.com/community.